There is a substance so simple, yet so powerful, that it shaped human survival, trade, and even empires. It's on every table today, but once, it was more valuable than gold. This is the story of how humans first used salt. Long before farming, long before cooking, our ancestors didn't need to add salt to their meals. Hunter-gatherers and even Neanderthals ate diets rich in meat, blood, and wild plants. These foods already carried the sodium their bodies needed. A fresh kill from the hunt or a handful of gathered leaves and roots gave more than enough to survive. But salt was still important. Just like elephants, deer, and monkeys today, early humans and their relatives sought it out in nature. They licked salty rocks, drank from mineral-rich springs, or chewed on soil where animals gathered. In these ancient landscapes, salt was not yet a spice, but a hidden necessity. It was survival, found in the earth itself, and for tens of thousands of years, that was enough. Then, around 10,000 years ago, everything changed. Humans began to farm. Fields of wheat, barley, and rice slowly replaced the wild diet of meat and plants. For the first time in history, people relied on grains as their main food. But there was a problem. Grains are filling, yet they hold very little salt. Without meat and blood at every meal, early farmers began to crave what their bodies were missing. Villages that rose near salt springs or mineral-rich soils suddenly had an advantage. Here, people could scrape salty earth or boil water to collect the crystals left behind. Salt was no longer just an accidental part of the diet. It became something humans needed to seek out. The age of farming created the first hunger for salt, and with it, the first steps towards seasoning food. Once people began to seek salt, ingenuity followed. Across the Neolithic world, communities learned to harvest it from the land. Some places had briny springs. People scooped the mineral water into clay pots and set them over hot fires. As the water boiled away, a white crust formed. Scrape it, dry it, and you had portable salt. In wetter regions, brine was filtered through ash or reeds to remove mud before boiling. Elsewhere, shallow pans were left in the sun and wind, letting nature do the drying. The result was the same: compact salt cakes, easy to store, easy to trade. Archaeology shows early workshops near salt springs in Europe and in parts of Asia. Pits, hearths, broken boiling pots, and thick layers of salty residue mark the first small industries. This wasn't luxury, it was survival technology. With reliable salt, food changed. Fresh fish could be packed in layers of crystals and kept for weeks. Meat from a single hunt could feed families long after the fire went out. Villages could plan for lean seasons. Travelers could carry provisions farther than before. The first salt makers didn't write manuals. They left traces: scorched clay, crystallized rims, and pathways of trade radiating from their springs. From simple fires and clay pots, a quiet revolution began, turning a local resource into a life-preserving staple. Salt was more than flavor. It was survival. For early farmers and hunters, the problem wasn't catching food. It was keeping it. Fresh meat spoiled quickly. Fish rotted in just a day. Without preservation, whole harvests or hunts could be lost. Salt changed everything. Rubbed into meat, it drew out moisture. the very thing bacteria needed to grow. Packed around fish, it slowed decay, turning a perishable catch into a food that could travel hundreds of miles. In cooler climates, salted food could last through the harsh winter months. In warmer regions, it allowed traders to carry provisions across deserts and seas. Salted cheese, dried meats, preserved vegetables, all of these gave communities stability. For the first time, people were not bound to the season of the hunt or the speed of spoilage. Salt gave them time, it gave them distance, and it gave them security against hunger. Salt was no longer just food, it became meaning. Across ancient cultures, salt carried a sacred weight. It purified, it preserved, it protected. People believed it could drive away evil spirits or seal oaths between allies. A pinch of salt shared in a ritual meal was more than seasoning. It was a bond. Archaeology reveals salt offered in burials, scattered over the dead to guard them on their journey. In temples, it was sprinkled as a symbol of purity. In some traditions, newborns were rubbed with salt to shield them from harm. But salt also meant power. Control the source, and you controlled survival itself. Chiefs, kings, and empires rose around the ownership of salt springs and mines. It was not just traded as a commodity, it was demanded as tribute. What began as survival had transformed into symbol and authority. Salt was life, but now it was also law. From survival and ritual, salt moved into something larger: economy. Wherever salt was scarce, it became as valuable as precious metals. Caravans carried it across deserts. Ships loaded with salt sailed the Mediterranean. Great trade routes emerged, arteries of human connection with salt at their core. In Africa, salt caravans crossed the Sahara for weeks, camels laden with heavy slabs. In China, entire roads were built to move salt inland, guarded like royal treasure. In Europe, towns grew rich controlling salt pans and mines, their markets buzzing with life. Salt wasn't just a good to trade, it shaped cities, funded armies, and created wealth. A resource once boiled in clay pots now flowed across continents, binding distant peoples together. Salt no longer belonged only to villages. It was now global, the white rock that fueled civilization itself. By the age of kingdoms and empires, salt was no longer just traded. It was taxed, fought over, and used to build power. In ancient China, dynasties controlled salt production as a state monopoly, funding armies and bureaucracy. Rome built entire roads to move salt and even paid soldiers partly in salt, giving us the word salary. Wars were fought over salt-rich lands. Cities under siege were starved when their salt supplies were cut off. In Africa, rulers grew wealthy by taxing every grain of salt that passed through their lands. Control salt, and you controlled people. It was the invisible foundation of empires, not celebrated like gold or silver, but often more essential. Because while luxuries glittered, salt kept armies marching, citizens fed, and power alive. And so, from survival to trade, from symbol to empire, salt shaped the rise of civilization itself. It built roads, funded armies, and tied distant worlds together. And yet, after all of this, it still sits quietly on our tables today. The simplest crystal with the greatest history.